Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone back, and we're going to pick up where we left off in the policy discussions. The next policy is draft policy ARIN 2014-20, transfer policy for slow start and simplified needs verification. And I believe that, very good. Come on up, Kevin. Kevin Bloomberg.
This is what a mic looks like? Never seen one.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. So this is a policy that is similar to the last policy, but completely different. It looks at 8.3 and 8.4 transfers, and comes up with a way to simplify some of the needs without removing necessarily all of the needs that was in the previous policy. And when I say it's similar in vein, in fact, when we did a staff and legal review 2 weeks ago, legal actually co-joined them in his description of the two policies and sort of looked at it. So the one thing about this policy, and I wish to apologize now, is the policy is 4 pages long. So we'll start with the problem statement. As you might be aware, we're running out of IPv4 space. I heard there's a lot of V6 space available, but we are running out. So new organizations will have a difficulty qualifying for slow started space. And new organizations that are growing rapidly will have difficulty by growing under slow start, is obviously a concern in the transfer market. When you could just come back to ARIN, it was easy to deal with slow start. Well, easy is a hard word, but it was possible to just keep coming back to ARIN in the slow start model every 3 months, every month, whatever the case may be. Here, I've used all my space, give me more, give me more, give me more. Well, that give me more is now gone. So going to the transfer market 12 times over an 18-month period, as an example, would probably be considered onerous to anybody in this room. So organizations with regular growth may have difficulty getting the right sized block and may require multiple transfers. Staff have said that's actually not an issue if you are approved, and this was, again, the staff comments came out very recently, so after text freeze. But basically, I believe staff said you don't need to worry about this. If you get approved for an amount of space, you're fine. We'll allow multiple transfers. Rapid growth, where we need to double. Existing orgs are going to have a problem with that, with unprecedented growth. So here's the policy statement, and I'm just going to try to go through this very briefly, and I hope people have had time in advance to read some of it because it is long, and there are some nuances. So the main part of this policy is, right now, in many respects, an 8.x transfer, an 8.3 and 8.4. This does not include 8.2, so just very important, 8.2 is not included in this at all. But an 8.3 and an 8.4 is fundamentally based on a 4.x requirement. So when you go to ARIN today, and John, if I say anything wrong, please, I'm sure you will correct me, but when you go to ARIN today, by and large, you will say, based on 4.x policy, I need this space, and this is my 24-month run rate versus my 3-month run rate. And ARIN goes, based on your MDN or microallocation or this or that, absolutely, that sounds right. You are now approved in an 8.x transfer. That puts a lot of requirements on back and forth, and the 4.x is a very complicated policy based on the free pool versus the transfer market. What this policy tries to do is say, let's extricate the two, and let's look at 8.3 and 8.4 as its own section. These are the rules for an 8.3 and an 8.4 transfer. Let's not think about the 4.x, let's keep it completely separate. The advantages to that is it's one clean space for you to look at for an 8.3 or an 8.4 transfer. The one disadvantage is we now have to look at all 4.x section and say, does this apply, not apply, does this work the same way, is this easier, is this more difficult? And that's the one complexity with a policy like that. There will be definitely some cleanup to the text because, as an example, we have identified that MDN and TPIA do need some love in this policy. They are less, those two policies potentially are less stringent than what would go in here normally, but that could be added in very easily to allow for MDN and TPIA, those sections in the 4.x, to fall under 8. So the main change, we now go to replacing out the 24-month supply of IP addresses. We go to the new sections, 8.31 new orgs, and if you can demonstrate 50% immediate need, you'll qualify for a minimum assignment of a 24. That was based on previous NRPM. So in the current NRPM, there is no maximum size for an initial allocation that has been defined. That was removed out very recently. One of the suggestions was, if you have a 50% immediate need, you can get the space that you need, and we take out the sizing of the 24. That's for, I'd love to get feedback on that. Is there some magic number that we should put in transfers that don't exist now today in the free pool 4.x? So an end user right now says 24, and an ISP says 21. Again, if we collapse them down, those two sections would become one, and because there would be no distinction between an ISP and an end user really at that point. For an existing org, once you've got your 80%, again, as measured under Section 4, across all of your aggregate, which is very different from how it works today, across all your aggregate, allocated, assigned, reallocated, reassigned, just you've got your 80%, then you can go to the next, which is you can be approved for space, okay? You can complete one or more, so that's codified now. Staff have said that it's not a problem, you are, but it is now codified. And you won't exceed what your existing amount is. So let's go to stable growth. Organizations may be approved for additional address space equal to the amount of address space they are holding at the time of approval. Okay? Is that good? Is that bad? How does that impact your organization? How does that impact the community? Something to think about. So you're going to get additional address space equal to everything you're holding at the time. You're holding an 18, you can get approved for an 18. You're holding a 2, can you get approved for a 2?
2/2?
Aggregate, we're talking aggregate.
Sure.
I don't know if somebody does or doesn't have
Probably
it.
better to use the example of the 8. If you're holding a /8, you can transfer in another in case the first one runs out.
Exactly, and then you can go in for something even bigger. So organizations may be approved for additional address space equal to 24 times the organization's calculated monthly average use rate. Again, this is another way of giving you as much as you possibly can without complicating the numbers, and that comes into a rapid growth scenario. What is a monthly use rate? Okay, you know what? If it's December, things might be slow. If it's November, things might be fast, and allowing you, the organization, to define where your run rate was. Hey, pick the last 12 months. That gives you the best indicator of what my monthly run rate is. Or, you know what, things are really picking up. Use the last 3 months. That's the best indicator for how things are growing with me. That's a look back window. So that is actual usage. It's a real number for everybody here. Right now it says 24 months forward looking. That's what the transfer policy today is. So One is based on, I think I'm going to need the space, versus here is 24 times what my average monthly real use is. Big difference, okay? You can return space. If you're getting space, I don't know why you would do that, but hey, we're giving you the option. You can return space, and then maybe you return out some smaller blocks. Those smaller blocks get added back to your inventory of what you're allowed to get, and you can get one bigger block if you so choose. Return space is in there. So the one thing that is important, if you go off and do an 8.2 merger and suddenly everything changes, that gets taken care of, okay? There's lots of great stuff here. And the best part is then we deal with 8.4, and it's the same as 8.3. One word difference, subtlety, and we're all good. So my questions for the community are, this is a lot of text. Can you get behind an omnibus? And an omnibus is anything more than one simple change to me or one or two simple changes. Can you get behind an omnibus? Do you want the AC to work on an omnibus? The second option is, do you want us to look at a mask, which is a second way of doing this, which is, here are all the things, because right now the only mask that we have in 8.3 is 24 months. You see 3 months, you make it 24. You see 3 months, you make it 24. That's the mask that we have now. Would it be better to say, like, we're going to follow 4.x, but here are all of the things that we want to make simpler in the in 8.3, and come up with just a short list. And if there's a short list, based on all of the things in here, what are the things you'd like to see in that short list? What are the things you support in this policy or don't support in the policy? The last thing before I open the mic is, it's important to note, this policy is not contradictory to 14. It is completely different than 14. You can support 14 and go down that path. From what I saw just at the mic earlier, I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into 14. There might be very little work that goes into this, and we might be able to get this passed right away, and this might be that baby step till something like 14 comes along. So these aren't, I want to support one and not the other. You can have a preference, but it's important to note that sometimes it's easier to reach consensus on the baby steps than on the big steps. So I want to open up the mic. If you have any questions, by all means, please come up.
Sean Kennedy, XO. I mean, I just want to take a little bit of issue with what you just said about putting this forward as a baby step, because there is so much language. There's a lot of stuff in there, like picking a 3-month window versus a 12-month window. I mean, is that necessarily a good thing? Because, I mean, a lot of companies, government organizations have money to spend that they need to spend before their budget year is up. So the last quarter of the year, they may spend all that money. I'll turn up a bunch of new customers and have a huge burst in ports that's not going to be sustained across the following year or the following 24 months. So I just think there's just a lot of text for something and a lot of complexity, and implementing stuff within the section that, I mean, previously we'd covered separately. And I don't necessarily consider that a baby step. So I would tend to sort of say, let's pick one or the other for the AC to actively work on with the community from the two policies, and see that the community is really behind that policy.
Thank you.
Hello, Donnie Roisman with SoftLayer. I'm opposed to any further work on this policy. Specifically, there's one section I take issue with, which has to do with further codifying the minimum requirements for existing orgs to complete transfers. I prefer the work in 8321. I understand that 8321 primarily is here to document what is probably the practice, referring back to some of the 4.x NERPM language. However, I'm in favor of moving forwards with proposal 14 instead, and long-term actually working towards eliminating all needs-based assessments, historical, future-looking, for all transfers 8.2 and 8.3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Danny? So presuming 14 died for some reason, the community didn't adopt it because of the discussion here and the work going on, are there changes that could be made to 2014-20 that would make it acceptable?
No, in my opinion, if 14 died and 2014-20 actually moved forward, then we'd have more work removing language that got introduced in 2014-20. So
My question is, what language would that be that would make it acceptable to you?
honestly, any language that further codifies any sort of needs-based or any utilization assessment, forwards-looking, rear-looking, for 8.2 or 8.3, I believe needs to be removed entirely.
Okay, thanks.
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications, ARIN AC. I oppose the policy. At the risk of standing in front of and possibly being run over by the omnibus, I can't get behind it. I think when we made 8.3 dependent on Section 4, we did so advisably and with proper intent. There is a lot of work over many years that has gone into Section 4, and it is, I think, a bad idea to have the policies by which we govern transfers and the policies by which we govern allocations and assignments from the free pool diverge. I think the extent to which they have already diverged is unfortunate and has proven to be harmful, but I'm in the minority on that, so we live with what we have. But I don't think making it worse is a good idea.
Thank you.
Jason Schiller, Google. As one of the originators of this policy, I'm going to apologize for the omnibus nature of it. And I'm going to keep my comments just to the omnibus nature at this point. The reason why it is an omnibus is because the policy is trying to do a bunch of things simultaneously. It's trying to take care of new entrants that are holding no space. How do they work in the transfer market? It's trying to deal with this requirement that the paperwork and the justification of need is very difficult. So it's trying to simplify that. So for those that have space and want more space, there's this simply double option. Show me you're using what you've got and double. I thought that was fairly simple. But then there's this third camp, which is, people that are rapidly growing, where a doubling of what they're currently holding is less than a 2-year supply. So we need something for them as well. So the reason why it's an omnibus is because it is trying to do 3 separate things. It's trying to help people that need to be bootstrapped that have no space. It's trying to make it easy for people that have space that aren't growing rapidly. And it's trying to give the people that are growing rapidly an option to keep growing rapidly without being too painful. And then the fourth point is this separation from Section 4. It's unclear to me to what extent today Section 4 applies to transfers. It seems that slow starts doesn't apply to transfers. It seems to me that if you come in with a 24-month looking future projection of need that is not necessarily supported by being twice what your last 1 year's run rate is, that's acceptable in transfers today. So part of the reason why this policy is so long is because it took all of the text for Section 4 and incorporated it here with some minor tweaks. It tried to make immediate need a little bit more difficult and at the same time a little bit easier. And it was trying to give immediate need some teeth. So one of the things that's very different about immediate need in Section 8 is if you can show that you've got things to number, those things count. You don't actually have to get the addresses on the things in 30 days, which is a substantial barrier to entry for larger end sites. So again, I apologize for the omnibus nature. We talked about dividing it out. The fear was if we divided it, then maybe only one piece would move forward and not the others, and that would be unbalanced and unfair.
Jason, I think you've actually brought up a very interesting and key point here, which is in the staff comments that came out recently. One of the bullet points was slow start is not used to assess 8.3 transfers. So when the community is looking at 4.x and what we think, there seems to be a difference or potentially a different understanding as to what is applied in an 8.x transfer. Mr. Kern?
So recognize that we try to make transfers happen, not stand in the way of them. Parties will come to us and say, I wish to transfer address space based on the policy as written for ISPs, the policy is written for end users, the policy based on MDN, multiple discrete networks. If someone can show us a policy under which they would have been issued space, and the only thing that's changing is the extrapolation to 24 months, then we'll approve the transfer. We're actually not trying to get in the way, we're actually trying to work with parties to get them through. But it does mean the entire policy body that we use for issue and allocation is available for transfers today. And that means that explaining to someone the requirements for transfers is having to explain every circumstance in which we could possibly issue address spaces and then saying, but that on a 24-month basis. It is a non-trivial process.
Donnie Roseman, Software again. Just to follow up, right after I sat down, I realized, John, you asked a good leading question. So to follow up on, I do represent Software, and we are attempting to become an active recipient or buyer in the transfer market, and we're concerned that the ARIN policies in 8.3 are actually going to get in our way. In my opinion, what I'd like to see happen is that if you have a willing recipient and you have a willing giver, let's call it a seller or buyer if you want. If you have two parties that actually if the recipient actually has a legal org registered with ARIN and is paying their dues and is a good standing member of ARIN, and you have a transferor who shows a good chain of custody, title, and legal representation of the address space they want to transfer, I think the only thing I want ARIN to do is to get the request from them, get the approval from me, update the database, and get out of our way and let us actually grow our business.
Mike Joseph, Google. As the other co-author of this original omnibus proposal, I feel like I was thrown under an omnibus recently. I would say that it was actually our intention to incorporate most of the qualifying criteria from Section 4. In fact, I think if you go to the slide where we talk about the 50% or the 80% use of space, we actually refer under 8321, we actually refer to as measured under Section 4. So it was in fact our intent that any amount of space that would be considered used for Section 4 purposes is to also be considered used in this Section 8.3, 8.4. So that if there's something we missed there, that would be something we would have hoped to have fixed. All that said, I actually do want to follow up on John's point. You said that you actually do purport to use Section 4 as the qualifying criteria for a 2-year supply, but today under Section 4, the primary qualifying criteria is historical utilization. Could you clarify if historical utilization is the primary qualifying criteria under Section 8.3?
Sure. If you go and justify, you come to us and you say, here's my historical utilization rate, how much I've used over time, and I'm going through it at this rate, and now I'd like an additional address block. Right now, by the way, we still have addresses, so we'd actually look and see what we could give you based on a 3-month run rate. You could say, instead, I'd like to get that times 8 because I want to justify doing a transfer of 8 times as much based on that run rate, okay? So for parties that do have historical utilization, because they currently hold address block, we're quite happy to follow that because that's in the policy.
However, it would seem that there are recent comments on PPML that would suggest that ARIN's interpretation of 8.3 also is inclusive of forward-looking statements exclusively. in certain requests.
No, not
Well,
exclusively.
no,
but-
but that one might exclusively use forward-looking statements as justification for 8.3.
Yes, we do have parties who turn around and say, I am intending to use it, here's my intended use. And that more represents what happens more with end users, because end users come in and say, I need address space. And if you look at the policy for end user assignments, it's based on 25% and 50%. So it's a forward-looking statement, and it's usually an assignment. Both are applicable if someone comes in and does a transfer. And we've had parties justify under either process.
Are most transfers approved based on an historical look back or a forward-looking statement
I do
today?
not know. I have to go generate that.
Thank you.
But I guess, back to the policy. Do you support the policy as written?
Yes, I wrote it.
I understand. I'm just asking. Do you, based on what you've heard so far, would you suggest any changes to it?
I would suggest further clarification of people's concerns about TPIA and MDN, as Kevin clarified. We've had some discussions about this as our shepherd, but I believe that some of them are actually probably addressed here, and if the language is insufficient, I'd like to strengthen that language to further clarify our intent. I do know MDN needs to actually be worked on, but in general, I support the policy for the most part as it's written.
So Mike, just to put you on the spot a little bit, slow start, that whole portion of it, staff is saying in 4.x, they're not using that for an 8.x. Is your intention that we should continue keeping the entire slow start section that you've now put into 8.x, or that we should extricate that out and not require it?
Our intention, I speak only for myself, obviously.
Yes.
The lead author was Jason, who I believe is behind me. I would say, I believe that the interpretation of a slow start-like policy that is written into here would be my intent. It's much more generous than traditional Section 4 slow start. And it recognizes the limitations of essentially accepting any arbitrary representations of forward-looking business plans by transfer recipients, by requiring an actual demonstrated history while simultaneously limited the number of transfers that would have to occur.
Thank you.
Andrew Dull, ARIN AC. I first would like to thank the authors for proposing an omnibus policy, because I think this has brought to light a number of issues and discussion points that the community needs to have as we move from the free pool having available space to not having available space. The policy as they have crafted, I believe, is a very interesting look at how we would live in a post-runout world. However, from my perspective, I believe we need a simpler overall policy, not a more complicated policy. And thus, while I support the idea of an omnibus, as you asked, the question to start with, Kevin, I am hesitant to add the language bulk of what this specific policy is proposing. I believe that what we need to do is look at what we want as a long-term policy and take elements of which are probably in this proposed policy to create a very simple, long-term approach to what we want our registry to do over the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Kevin, I had a
Yeah.
remote.
I know John's question
I'll
is going
spare
to be.
time. Is there text that you would change to this?
Yes.
Right? Which text?
I would be remiss if I said I had a list at this point, but I believe it is significant, and I believe there are good concepts here, but as written now, I don't believe it meets the needs of the future community.
We have a jabber.
I have a remote comment from Kevin Oddie from Flying Penguin Technologies, who does not operate in Antarctica. The problem statement says, as IPv4 depletion occurs, it will become difficult for organizations to get IP addresses. He thinks the real problem is that we're not seeing sufficiently rapid IPv6 deployment. Sadly, it appears that the only way this is going to happen is precisely if IPv4 is difficult to get. He therefore does not support this policy. Perhaps future IPv4 allocation needs could be tied to IPv6 allocation, maybe even utilization, to act as a stick since the carrot hasn't been working.
I'm closing the microphone soon on this proposal. If you wish to speak, approach the mics.
Jason Schiller, Google. I just wanted to clarify the hypothetical that we were talking about earlier about someone asking for a transfer of space on a 24-month future-looking projection. So imagine I'm an ISP. I get a /24 from my upstream provider. I number into it, I use it. It's 80% used. I go to ARIN, I say, I'd like a 24 as an ISP. 80% used the 24 I've got. I'm going to renumber and return. I get a /24 from ARIN. It's 80% utilized on the day I get it. I number into it immediately. I come back to ARIN and I say my /24 is 80% used. I'd like more, please. I get another /24
You get
or a 23.
23.
Well, it depends what I ask for. I might just ask for a 24. I get a 23. It takes me 2 years to burn through that 23.
Right.
I come back in 2 years and I say, I'm growing at a /24 a year. I would like to transfer in space because I need more space. I'm out. I'm beyond 80% utilized. However, we're now offer this new whiz-bang service where instead of just offering internet service in Antarctica where we're primarily located, we're going to do it across the entire United States and Canada and the Caribbean. And based on what our uptake is in Antarctica and the population of penguins, I believe we're going to need a /16.
Right.
And I've got VC funding, and here's all the equipment I'm going to buy, and here's all the circuits I'm going to lease. Here's my entire business plan is rock solid, and I've got the funding.
Right.
Can I have my 16, please?
You're an ISP. You're asking for additional address space. We go to section 424, ISP additional requests, and we have to show that you have 80% utilization of your most recent allocation. You have that, right? Right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to give you the next block. You actually have a
For a
23.
transfer, I want to transfer. Can I transfer a 16?
If you attempt to transfer,
I have a solid business case. VC funding.
that's trying to understand. So now you're not coming in looking for address space. Instead, you want to do a transfer.
That's right. With a
Okay.
16.
In theory, we can't handle you under the ISP policy, but you have immediate need because you can demonstrate a business impact if you're not going to be able to get the addresses in 30 days. And immediate need is an allocation policy that is equally applicable to you under those circumstances.
So based on my 24-month business plan requiring a
No,
16.
based on the fact that you said you're going to have a business impact in 30 days if you don't get an approval. Your
Do I
hypothetical
qualify
is-
for the 16?
are you qualified under the immediate need policy?
I am not immediately going to have all of those customers, no.
Well, then you wouldn't qualify.
I'm going to have them real soon, though.
Then you wouldn't qualify.
So,
Then you wouldn't qualify, Jason. Okay?
So
Is
how
there
much do I
text to this you want to
qualify
change?
How much do I, no, under current policy, how much do I
Under
qualify?
the current policy, right. It depends. I'd have to actually look at the application. We'd have to run it through RSD and have them sit down and go through all the documentation. I do not know. I can't do the full, complete hypothetical validation of a process, okay, based on all the parameters you just gave. My question to you is there text to this policy that would make you support it? Do you support it presently?
Yes, as the originator of this policy, I support it.
Excellent. Good to hear. Thank you. Okay, any other comments at the mics? I am going to close the microphone. Last chance. We're going to finish discussion. Okay, seeing no one else up. Okay, we close the discussion. Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to move ahead, trying to catch up with our policy discussions. The next one is Draft Policy 2014-1, Out-of-Region Use. And come on up, David Farmer.
Okay. This is a policy that's been around for been working on for a while.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I will adjust the mic. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. This is a policy that we're working on for a little while now. I'm the author. Neither of the shepherds are available for this. They'll be running the show at the main meeting. Problem statement. Currently, policy neither clearly forbids nor clearly permits out-of-region use of ARIN registered resources. Previous attempts at limiting this have went down in flames. So maybe the next option is come around from the other direction, and can we clearly permit it? But obviously, if we're going to permit it, we got to, what does that mean? And there's a number of, it's not just, oh, you can do whatever you want. So, a summary. Organizations may request number of resources from ARIN for use outside the region. You can't request resources from ARIN and use that same justification from another RIR, only one at a time. You must report utilization of all of the same type of resource when requesting resources greater than a certain amounts there. When you're requesting resources for out-of-region use. When requesting number of resources from ARIN greater than the threshold above, you got to report that. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. And utilization must meet the current ARIN number policy for all resources that you're reporting. Discussion, there were several concerns raised in the staff and legal review. There was a request for a clarification. There's some questions about ICP2 alignment. There's a number of legal jurisdiction and restriction issues. And a warning of a potential additional government oversight. These go to the crux of the issue, though, the problem statement, we don't either clearly forbid or clearly permit. So should we be clearly permitting? And how do we rationalize this use with ICP2? In case you're not familiar with what ICP2 is. And okay, this isn't the slide I had, but that's okay. The ICP2 is the policy for creating a new RIR, and the proposed RIRs must operate in a international large geographic organization approximating continental size, and there should be one RIR serving each region established under a single management in one location. And this is the link to it, but the point is, this is how you create a new RIR. It's not clear, obviously, there's some intent here about what, but it is not very explicit about what this means about the operation of the RIR and a number of these other things. So, mic's open. Please. In particular, if you have, comments regarding these discussion items, I'd love to hear them.
So the policy in your guide is on page 6. It's the draft policy ARIN 2014-1, out-of-region use. And it has a pretty long analysis and staff assessment and the new and old text.
Hello, Donnie Roisman with SoftLayer again. As a representing a multinational company or a company with data centers across the world, I'm definitely in support of a policy which clarifies the use in region and out of region, and I do definitely agree with the problem statement here. I'm not exactly very clear, though. Well, I appreciate that we're trying to clarify it. I'm reading it. I'm not exactly clear what the end result is going to be. Are we trying to say that an organization established within the RIR region should be going to, within the ARIN region, should be going to ARIN for all of their IP needs, regardless of where they're used. So ARIN is no longer going to be asking the question, are you intending to use these in region? Or are we, I guess that's my
Let
question.
me try. Current practice, you have to have a legal entity in the region, one capable of contracting with us. But you also, your utilization has to be based on demand, customers, and equipment infrastructure in the region. If you come to us and you have an entity located in LA and you say, my growth is entirely in the Asia Pacific region, when we calculate your growth, we see is zero because we don't see what's outside the region. So we literally will disapprove a transfer coming in because you have no in-region use. We won't issue you address space and we won't transfer in. We've talked about should that be incidental use, or what if many times we have companies who the majority of the use is here, but some of it is outside the region. We know that happens. So in trying to clarify this after 2 attempts to define what should be allowed in region and what should be prohibited, the proposer said, let's go the other way. Let's say it's all it's all allowed. So if you, under this policy proposal, if someone were to come to us and say, I'm incorporated in LA, my usage is entirely in the Asia Pacific region or entirely within the LACNIC region, and here's my growth rate, we would see that as valid. Effectively, we would provide them services and provide them, allow a transfer, provide them registry services, even if they were completely outside of region other than the contracting entity.
Okay, yeah, if that's what this policy is proposing, then I support it, yes. Thank you.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, ARIN AC. I don't support this policy. We couldn't come up as a community the last time with majority plurality, big, large, whatever you wanted to call it. We couldn't define even just a number. And so what do? We throw the bathwater out with the baby, and we say, just let's give up. That's what we're going to do. So I've got 2 fundamental issues. The first issue is that we are asking other regions to dip their cookies in the milk a certain way because that's how we want it. We're going to throw out the whole concept of regionality completely 100%, and you just go along with it, which I have a real problem with. It opens the floodgate to anybody else coming along and say, you know what, if there's nothing regional about what you RIRs are doing, let's just do it ourselves, and we're giving an excuse the wrong way. We add unbelievable complexity, right? Omnibus into itself of complexity related to organizations and how they have to show what they're doing globally now, because we can't come up with a simple number. And that's what I think we need to do. If you're using X% outside a region, that's okay, because we understand that that's real. If you're using more than that, go to the other region, or put it in the other region, or whatever the case may be. But let's simplify this or get rid of it, because this is just an albatross.
Yes, Kevin?
Yes.
If it turns out that this were to be what we had to work with, is there any change to it that would make it acceptable to you?
Yes, gutting it out completely and just
Yeah,
putting in
that's
a
not a
number.
change. Okay, thank you.
Jason Schiller, Google, and the ASOAC. I wanted to follow, I have 3 primary concerns. And I think the most important one is a follow-up from Kevin's point here. The way this policy reads, it suggests that if I am an organization and I hold resources in RIPE, and I have a global network, and I am primarily in the ARIN service region, and I'm primarily using ARIN service region addresses, and I run out of space, and that space is for use in Europe, I need to disclose my RIPE resources, which I'm perfectly fine with. But this policy also suggests that my RIPE resources have to be utilized, which I am also perfectly fine with. This policy suggests that they have to be utilized to ARIN standards. So this community is suggesting that they should tell another regional community how addresses need to be used in order to qualify to get additional space from ARIN. That seems problematic to me. It seems problematic on two cases. First, that this community is asserting how another community should use their resources. But secondly, there's potentially an interesting corner case here where I may actually be using my ripe space within the ripe requirements of use, but that doesn't necessarily meet the ARIN requirements of use. And I am stuck and unable to get addresses from ARIN because of that. So I know you're going to ask me what
What would you change to fix that problem?
The change I would fix is there's a statement in the text, and if you go back to the language of the text, I could find it, that basically says you must disclose resources used in the other region and ensure that they're used to ARIN standards. Strike the ensure that they're used to ARIN standards. Just
Okay.
make it ensure that they're utilized. And then measure them based on the appropriate RIR's standards. So that was my first concern, and that is a primary concern. My second concern is this fact that we're defining in-region and out-of-region usage. I really want to put on the record a strong cautionary note for people to be very conservative for if they decide to use this definition in the future for different things. If you want to bill me differently because of the amount of resources I'm using out of region, cause ARIN to do more work in verification, I'm fine with that. But if at some point in the future there's going to be other policies based on treating in-region and out-of-region differently, I strongly oppose. And I think that this language is a little bit dangerous. I'm happy for it to move forward, but I'm noting that at some point in the future that I will stand up and say we should not treat in-region and out-of-region use differently. So that's my second concern. My third concern is with regard to this incidental usage. It seems kind of unfair that if you're just taking a small amount of space from other RIRs that you get a free pass on reporting how it's used. You know, I think if you're really small and this is a hardship, you probably don't have resources in more than one RIR. If you're big enough to have resources in more than one RIR, it's really not that difficult to say, oh yes, and I have a ripe/21, and here's how it's being used.
Okay.
So I think those are all of my objections. Yeah.
Thank you. Folks, please approach the mic if you want to speak. Add yourself to the queue. I am going to be closing the queue shortly.
Mike Joseph, Google. I strongly support this policy and its intent. Although I agree with many of the concerns raised by Jason, I would say that it's very important that we have a policy that recognizes that there are multinational entities already operating, that these entities are often based or have a strong nexus of operation within the ARIN service region, and that it's important that these entities are able to continue to obtain resources from their home RIR for their global operations. I echo Jason's comments that it's very difficult to adequately classify resources beyond the potential negative downstream effects of doing so. It's hard to simply do so. So I would equally caution against trying to distinguish between in-region and out-of-region use. And with all due respect to my colleague Kevin, I do disagree that this throws the RIR system out. Quite frankly, as John clarified at the beginning of this discussion, this policy does not change the fact that ARIN will serve only entities operating within their service region with a legal base of operations here. And so I don't see any reason why one multinational company should not be able to go to their home RIR. I don't think that tosses out the RIR system. And as we've said in previous times when this type of policy has come up for discussion, it's virtually impossible to say where a /30 is actually used. And I don't think we really need to get involved in parsing that, quite frankly. Although I do strongly support this policy, I would equally support a policy that simply said, ARIN will issue addresses regardless of location to entities legally able to obtain resources from ARIN. And I actually don't see any problem with that. I don't see any problem ignoring space held by other RIRs as long as they're not as long as the resources used for those space is not also used to justify ARIN space. I think that's relatively easy to tackle in policy. So I would have absolutely no problem with either this policy because I think it's important that we have it. But if not this policy, then I would support a policy that would say you can use space as long as it's justified based on ARIN criteria wherever you may use it.
Okay.
I do have one clarifying question for staff. The policy as written does indicate that staff will apply a test to space that's used outside of the ARIN region. It is not clear to me if that test differs from the test that ARIN would currently apply to space used inside the ARIN region. And specifically, what I'd like to understand is, will RSD ask questions or require justification of a different nature than they would today? Today, if we turn over a complete justification package for address space, the usual host enumeration, pool counts, etc., if we include global space in that, would that be sufficient to RSD should this policy pass? Or is there going to be additional further documentation required for out-of-region space that's not currently required for in-region space?
So you ask an interesting question. Currently, we treat, we currently do have people who justify, and they do include utilization of address space in other regions. That's what's led to what is the right ratio of what's acceptable outside of region. We'll continue to do that. Regarding under this policy, what we'll do, as one of the policy proponents, I recommend you put language in that tells us what you want us to do.
I'm interested to understand how staff interprets the policy as written.
You want to know, we would continue the current practice. It doesn't specifically say otherwise. Unfortunately, Jason notes that it has us applying our criteria to address blocks that are issued and managed by other RIRs. Okay? If
you.
that's not what you want for practice, you should change the text.
I would prefer something else, but I think getting
I think
something
you
like
should
this,
make it more specific then.
well,
Okay?
as long as we don't derail this policy. Thank you.
Yep. I'm going to close the mics in 10. Get to the mics if you're going to get. 5, 4. Okay, Jason, I see you. 3, 2, 1. Mics are now, the queue's now closed, and just the people at the mics. Go ahead.
Hi, Peter Timish at ADREX. We actually don't have a position on this policy. We want to provide some clarification and some information. Currently at RIPE, there are dozens, and I mean dozens, of LIRs that are based in the United States that have space issued to them by RIPE. They're used solely in the United States. They get them absolutely the way that they do it. So the idea that somehow the other RIRs aren't doing this, RIPE has, and you can find the whole list, you can look at all the LIRs that are in the United States, and you can see that they have registration, they maintain it in their US address, and you look at their geolocation, it's entirely used in the United States. Many of those were people that were refused space by ARIN and just went to RIPE and got it, and they're based in the US. So this is already going on. This is a current practice you guys should be fully aware of.
No, very much so. And that's why it's up to this community to figure out what they want the practice for this region to be.
But it is already being done completely with full transparency in another region.
Agreed.
Hi, Rhonda McFadden, Wells Fargo. I feel rather ill-prepared compared to what everyone else has been saying here. I don't necessarily have an opinion on pro or against, but I do have some questions or comments about whether or not some thoughts have been taken into consideration. When we talk about RIRs and the different international locations, I can't help but think that that we're infringing some of the decisions that we're thinking about here, that we're not infringing on our RIR peers. Whether or not we've taken into consideration what their rules are, or whether or not a larger governing authority has taken those things into consideration. So, thank you.
No.
Joe Provo, Google. I support the intent. I strong nod to Jason for actually having parsed out some of the language errors, and I agree with them. And I just wanted to raise the historical point that in addition to the existing practice of registry shopping, that when, matching my gray hair to my colleagues here, when we set up this RIR thing, it was all about where the entities were incorporated, where their locus was, not about deployment and use, and that was utterly orthogonal. We've sort of kind of backed into that existing. And I think it's a bad thing, so we should clarify it.
Joe, you don't get away that easy.
Come on, Jason.
Given that there's a policy proposal on the table, are you in favor or against it? And is there anything that if you're against it that you could change to make you in favor of it?
I will be much more clear than I was. I support the intent. I believe there are language issues, and my colleague, Mr. Schiller, has identified the bulk, if not all of them.
Jason Schiller, Google. So if you put up the policy text, the second paragraph? know if
I
you-
don't have it
you
on
don't
the
have that? Okay.
slides.
So the thing that concerns me is the last sentence, and I'll read it. The report must demonstrate that all resources currently available for use within the requested service region are efficiently utilized based on applicable ARIN policy. One possible suggestion to get out of this problem is to change ARIN to RIR. The other suggestion to get out of this is to completely strike the last sentence and replace it with the inverse of the first sentence of that paragraph. Not that the first sentence should change, that should stay as well. The first sentence reads, "The services and facilities used to justify the need for ARIN resources that will be used out of region should not also be used to justify resource requests from another RIR." If you strike the last sentence, you need the inverse statement of this as well, which is, you will not use these to justify, will you not use, basically, it's no double counting, but it's no
Yeah.
double counting in both directions.
Okay.
So I think your options are either simply disclose all of the RIR resources that you're holding so that we can be sure you're not double counting, or we will look at all of your resources and make sure that they're justified per the RIR that issued them. I think those are your two choices out.
Okay.
Jason, do you have a preference for those two approaches?
Whichever the community finds more palatable.
Okay. And I just want to note, when you look at those two approaches, one of them would have ARIN applying other regions' policies again to resources in another region. So that means that Ina and I would get to become intimately familiar with RIPE, AP-NIC, LACNIC, and AFRINIC policies to make sure that someone coming to ARIN was also meeting those policies for all of the resources in those regions. The staff assessment for that particular approach will be an interesting staff assessment.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a balance here, right? The question is, how comfortable is the community with the possibility that somebody could, assuming they're not double counting, because we've taken care of that issue, how comfortable is the community that someone could go to another RIR, get a block of space, and before they've actually used it, come back to ARIN and ask for a block of space for a different purpose? Is that problematic? Is it problematic that I go to the well potentially 5 times and none of them have to be utilized until I come back to this for my 6th try at the well? So if that's really a concern, the only way around it is for either ARIN to do the review or for ARIN to reach out to their colleagues at other RIRs and ask for a go, no go.
You should suggest policy changes based on which you prefer.
I would like to hear which the community prefers. I think either is workable, personally.
So I just have one quick comment. So we're going to continue to discuss this later in the week. If you're around, please come. Myself, Bill Dart, and Milton Mueller, Milton and Bill Dart will be here tomorrow or the next day. Please talk to us in the hall around and give us your opinions, and please talk about this on PPML. Thank you.
And just remember, there is a room available to us if you want to continue discussion right after this meeting or anytime today. So don't hesitate to find me or one of the shepherds to line that up if you'd like to continue discussing any of these ideas today.
Okay, next up is Draft Policy ARIN 2014-16, Section 4.10, Austerity Policy Update. And we have, thank you, Dan is coming up. Dan is up.
Oh my
All right, we're almost there. Only 4 left. So I'm going to skip by a couple of these slides in the interest of time because several of the slides just repeat what's in the discussion guide, which it's on page 16 of the guide for those who want to follow along, which the problem statement and the policy statements, cover. But what I will go through is essentially what this proposal suggesting is there's a section 410 of the policy manual that carves out a /10 of address space for transition technologies. It's intended for when we finally run out of the free pool, that there would be blocks remaining behind that organizations could obtain for transition technologies like NAT and 6-4, things like that. What this proposal originally suggested was it was going to change the purpose of that section and turn it into an austerity section where organizations would be able to get small blocks of address space and not necessarily for transition technologies. So it was just kind of a shift from being limited to transition technologies towards just an austerity allocation for new entrants. The original draft of this suggested that the whole section be replaced, but the previous meetings, the feedback that was provided was a lot of people disagreed with that, and they liked the transition technology section to remain. So the current version of this draft splits the two out and says, okay, we're going to retain the transition technologies, but we're also going to create the austerity section. And what it had proposed was it would split that pool into two and provide half for each purpose. The other aspect of this is, in addition to the /10, future allocations from IANA would also go to fund this pool of address space. So some of the feedback that we've received so far was, one was just a general cleanup matter of removing the trigger event, since that has already passed. So it's kind of old language that we could clean up, which is not a problem. But some of the other feedback is a number of people did not care for the pool being split, and that the /10 should be retained for the transition technologies. So we're interested in more feedback here in the room as far as, do people support or oppose this? If so, what kind of changes would be made? Because right now, given the feedback that we've seen, we're considering abandoning this unless there's a clear voice for the other direction. So let the discussions commence.
Microphones are open. Please don't rush the microphones. If anyone would like to speak in favor or opposed to this, reasons why it should continue, reasons why it should be jettisoned.
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications. I'd jettison it. I don't think that we want to take away from the transition pool to fund this. I'm not sure if there's another source of funding available. I'm not entirely opposed to an austerity pool, although I don't see a lot of purpose to one. I think we should just recognize that we have a limited free pool, and when it runs out, and we all should be getting on with V6 a long time ago, actually.
Andrew Dull, I'm the author of this proposal. This was created based on discussions we had in Chicago around the need to fix some of the issues in the current policy when the free pool runs out. Based on what I've seen and heard from this community so far, they don't seem to believe that we need to fix that issue in this way. And at this point, I would not support the second bullet point on the slide to leave the pool reserved for transition technologies only and still have this policy, because this policy would be ineffective without actually having a substantial pool to do anything with. So unless we're willing to split the pool, then we should not do this and continue. And from what I have seen on the mailing list so far is that this policy idea, while hot in Chicago, is no longer hot. So maybe we should just move on.
It would appear to be a dull proposal.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, and I support abandoning this proposal. We have an austerity policy. Get your IPv6, you'll get your v4 bootstrap. If the numbering is a little off, if another region gets you at 22 and we're only at 24 right now maximum, we can talk about that later on when it becomes a sore point. But we actually do. The community really wanted v6 to be the austerity policy, and you will get your v4.
One remote comment.
Yep.
Kevin Audi says, I support abandonment. The wall has been getting bigger in the windshield for years. Moving the airbag isn't going to help.
Okay. Any further comments? Okay.
Mike Joseph, Google. I oppose this policy and seems to have arrived at consensus at that point. I would clarify that one of the other concerning aspects of the policy is the /28 part of it. I realize that's in there already for transition technologies, but I think that would be a very bad precedent to set for new assignments and allocations under austerity. So I would, if this policy by some miracle were to advance, I would suggest that number be adjusted.
Understood. Jason, you're going to come explain why this needs to be saved.
No. Jason Shaler, Google. I support abandoning this policy. If it
Okay, so if
was
we-
not to be abandoned, the thing that would really concern me is that all returned space, either to the IANA or to ARIN, would then go into this pool, and I think that that's a terrible idea.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to close the mics if no one else has a comment. Okay, microphones are closed. Thank you, Dan. Okay, next up is our Andrew, ARIN 2014-17, change utilization requirements from last allocate to total aggregate.
We need to move along. We're running low on time.
This isn't going to be dull.
Well, this won't, hopefully won't be dull.
If not dull, at least fast.
Okay. This is not the right policy.
Oh, I brought it up, I just, down here, and yeah, you got it, that one right there. Maximize the wrong window.
Okay. All right. So this policy is all about fixing an issue that we currently have with small organizations around the 3-month assignment window and one block not being full and not meeting 80%, but you have a need for something a little bit larger, but not quite getting there. I'm trying to run through this really quickly. So the way that this is currently worded is instead of doing 80% in the last block, we do 80% overall. That's how the policy would be changed. So in the staff and legal review, the staff noted that this has the potential to allow organizations who currently have a lot of space to automatically qualify for a lot more space. And that could be a way to drain the free pool very quickly. Legal noted that there appears to be an inequity between larger and smaller organizations because of the same issue that staff noted. So how do we potentially fix the issue that staff and legal noted? There are 3 ideas here. Your feedback is wanted on these 3 ideas. The first idea is about delaying the implementation of policy so that if the free pool is empty, really, you can't drain the free pool, so there you go. The second one is you add a requirement that any one block be utilized to 50%. So the delta here is changed from a gigantic number to 30%. And finally, the third option is to limit the policy to organizations which have less than a /18. And that number is a derived number that is not necessarily of significance. Jason is having a large question coming my way.
No, I just, Jason Schiller, Google, I think I'm just parsing this wrong. The second bullet there means that no block can be under 50%. If any block is under 50%, you don't qualify.
That's correct.
Okay, because I don't think that's what it says. I think it says that only one block has to be over 50%.
I
think that should be just an additional requirement.
That-
Every block must be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the wording
okay.
on the slide is rough. Sorry
Got
about
it,
that.
thank you.
The discussion we have about this is, do you believe the current utilization requirements need to be changed at all? Do you think this is a problem we need to be working on fixing? Do you see the need to mitigate the issues that have been raised by staff and legal, or should we just move forward with the known issues? And of course, do you support the any one of those three options? And do you support this policy draft? So let's get to the discussion.
Microphones are open.
Mike Joseph, Google. Could you go back to the slide that Jason was asking about a second ago? Thanks. So I agree that clarifying the 50% thing would be beneficial. I have no concerns about a 50% requirement, but I am quite concerned about the third bullet point. I think that creates a horrible inequity, and it's not clear to me how this policy is meant to hugely advantage larger operators over smaller ones. I hear that that's a staff concern and a legal concern. I'm not sure I buy it.
So in the staff comments, there is a example. Have you looked at the example and you believe their example is not feasible, or?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, let me take a closer look at that example. But I think, in general, I'll say this: it's easily proved that any I mean, if the example is the /24, I mean, you're talking about the /24 thing?
No.
Okay, a different example.
Is the example in the discussion guide?
In the discussion
All right.
guide. Let's see, there's, you're talking about the 80% utilization for smaller ISPs. Staff has seen situation where a small ISP with a /22 may need to issue a /24 to a customer but not have any available, but not be at 80% utilization. Talking about why the need for the policy at all? Or you're talking about the,
This part here.
okay. Right, there are two examples in the discussion guide under the staff comments. One, an ISP close to 100% utilization on its multiple prefixes, who immediately has 25,000 /24 equivalents and receives a /16, even though they just received the 16, because they're so heavily utilized on their prior holdings, they still qualify again for another resource.
I get that part, but the challenge I have with that is it's not actually unfair. We're penalizing a large operator that has been incredibly efficient at utilizing their address space for simply not having drained the free pool earlier. Moreover, even if I got that, it would simply be a renumbering exercise for me to then move customers into that block. So it's really just putting an unusual burden on the large provider who has a really efficiently used /8 or what have you.
Right.
In that case.
So the staff comments notes it's a possibility of occurrence. It doesn't put a value judgment on whether or not the provider who has been late to draining the free pool is actually good or bad. We just note it's a possibility.
Fair enough. Well, I posit that it's not a bad thing.
It's not an inequity that you believe needs to be remedied.
No, I don't. In fact, and I think that the /18 argument or point here would be a very bad thing. In general, however, I support the intent and wording of the policy.
So do you support the implement the idea of the first mitigation, the second mitigation, or none of the mitigations?
I definitely support the second mitigation. I don't think I support the first mitigation. Again, I'm not sure what the value is in adding that. I don't see this risk that I think others seem to see here.
Okay.
I don't think we need a mitigation at all.
No, I don't. I mean, No, I don't think we need a mitigation for large holders. I think the second one is actually not a mitigation for large holders. I think the second one is a policy clarification.
Okay.
So you don't believe we need that mitigation? Would you support the policy proposal as provided?
I would. I would equally be accepting of the 50% change.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications. I support the policy as written. I could accept either of the last two mitigations. The first mitigation is something which we are well on our way to achieving merely by delaying this policy yet again, which is why I put forth a motion which unfortunately went down to defeat on the last second to last AC call to advance this to recommended draft. We need to move this forward. There are real organizations that are really suffering from the current situation where they have customers that they need addresses for and they can't get those addresses because the customers that they're now acquiring have a greater need for address space than what's left in their available address space, but they're so small that they can't get to 80% with the utilization that they have, and they can't assign what they've got left to the customers that they've got coming in because those customers are larger than the small chunk they've got left. We need to fix that. We need to make it possible for people to move forward and look at their aggregate utilization is a very good way to do that cleanly. Fragmentation happens. It's a harder challenge for smaller organizations than it is for larger organizations, but it's a challenge all the way around. So whatever we do, let's do whatever we're going to do and move this policy forward. Waiting until the free pool is empty is merely a way to say that the people that are currently victims should always be victims.
Thank you, Owen.
I'm closing the microphones. Please approach the queue if you want to speak on this.
Leif Sawyer, GCI Alaska, AC candidate, and original proposal author. My bad that I didn't add in the modification number 2, but with that in there, I wholeheartedly support this.
Thank you.
I'm closing the queues. 10, 5, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that ends our discussion. Andrew, thank you very much. Okay, we have 2 more to go through, and we have 11 minutes. I think we can do this. The next, what? RS is up, and it's ARIN draft policy, ARIN 2014-18, simplifying minimum allocations and assignments.
RS, you're up. There you are. Now you're up. Those 11 minutes are ticking away.
Go up to the far right of the screen with the cursor.
Yeah, I was going to say, someone did. Someone did, you got it. Switch the SPAC mode. Yeah, thank you. There you go. You're over there. You got it.
Okay, and where is play? That's not play. View. Hey, there we go. Okay. Draft policy 2014-18, simplifying minimum allocations and assignments. So we figured in the interest of making this simple, we would put a slide up with the gist of what the proposal is as far as the AC understands it. We believe that the idea here is to remove the needs test for small allocations of /24, possibly larger depending on the current state of minimum allocations elsewhere in policy, and impose a rate limit of once a year under this policy. This is the problem statement. And I will engage in the unusual behavior of actually reading the slide because the print is smaller than I would have liked. New and small organizations are having a difficult time receiving resource allocations from ARIN because of the economic, administrative, and time burdens of making their way through ARIN's needs testing process. For small allocations, the burdens of needs testing may exceed the value of the resources, or may deter small, less well-funded organizations' ability to receive an allocation from ARIN. As ARIN was created to provide internet resources to all organizations within its geographic territory, this disparity in the policy manual needs to be addressed. The problem can be remedied by removing needs testing for any organization that applies to receive the current minimum block size allocation. The policy statement is inserted into the NRPM, possibly as 4217. A minimum IP allocation size has been defined per Section 4 of the ARIN Number Resource Policy Manual. Regardless of any policy requirements defined in any other active section of the policy manual, all organizations may apply and shall automatically qualify for the current minimum IP block allocation upon completing the normal administrative application process and fee requirements, and all organizations shall be eligible for such an allocation once every 12 months. Where this is in conflict with any other section in the policy manual, this section shall be controlling. So we've made some observations so far. First is that there is some support for loosening needs-based number policy. That's across the board. This is one of multiple policies in the queue, and the question for people here assembled is this the right approach? One of the questions that arose, though, immediately is, what's a minimum allocation anyway? Are we at /24 everywhere? I pay pretty close attention to this, and I can't even tell you off the top of my head without referring to the NRPM. This is likely to have unintended side effects, this ambiguity. How does this rate-limited approach interact with other policy? Does order of execution on the requests matter? Can you ask for this and then have it counted later or not counted? Can you ask for your non-justified after you justify? We don't understand. This section shall be controlling verbiage might turn out to be a difficulty. On the mailing list, we've had a little bit of support and a fair amount of opposition. Speaking as the shepherd on this, I'm inclined to move to drop this policy proposal if there were not some signs of support for it. So particularly if you support this, I'd like to hear from you. So let's discuss.
Microphones remain
Microphones,
open.
please. No one has any opinion about this either way. Peter.
And this is Peter Timish with Adrex. I don't have a position one way or another, but I do want to clarify, back to what I pointed out earlier, that problem has been going away because many of these small companies are just going to RIPE and they qualify. And they are getting the space from RIPE. So many of the new members at RIPE who get the final 22 are U.S. companies.
Thank you.
So they're solving the problem themselves.
Hello, Rhonda McFadden, Wells Fargo. I just question, is this minimum allocation for anybody? I mean, somebody like me with, is all the 16s I have, I can just come and ask for a new 24 every year? Or is this for new entities?
That was my understanding of the intention, yes, that regardless of justification, previous holdings, et cetera, that you could come and ask for a /24 and that it would be available to you. This proposal does not differentiate between free pool and transfer market, so one would assume that it would apply to equally to all of them.
So again, just thinking things out and, forgive me if I'm lacking some knowledge base here.
No, please, go ahead.
I would think that a policy like this would be primarily intended for the benefit of smaller companies and companies that don't currently have a presence. I would think that, those are the people that you need to get them online and get them involved in the internet now if they don't have the resources or the money to do IPv6 yet. So I would question whether we wouldn't want to say new allocations, or whether it's even worth considering the policy at all.
So it does speak about coming back once a year. So
And I do appreciate that. I think
would you be opposed to that on the basis that you get your first allocation and that's it? That from here on out, since now you're part of the haves, even though it's a small have, as opposed to the have-nots?
I think that that's worth considering, and that is one of the criteria that I did appreciate in here is that, you know, you don't want somebody just dipping in the well, dipping in the well, dipping in the well. I mean, you want to encourage people to move towards V6. So, you know, that's where I question a bigger entity like myself. Do I need to be coming back to dip in the /24 pool? Not to say that I might not need that, and I might regret saying this later when I apply for more space. But my point is that we need to encourage those big organizations to move towards V6, and it's those little organizations that need that step onto the internet and the opportunity to partake in the availability of services and merchant opportunities. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
I just want to take a quick second to tell Rhonda. Rhonda, you are definitely part of the knowledge base and exactly the people we're looking to hear from here. Thank you.
Mike?
Mike Joseph, Google. I strongly oppose this policy. I believe that this obviously is a toss out of needs basis. I think as a community, we've pretty clearly indicated we want needs basis, particularly from the free pool. And the nature of this policy encourages further fragmentation. To allude to my previous comment on a different policy, on this one, you don't even need a buy it now button. You just need to ask ARIN. And I think that this will mean that there will be dozens and dozens of 24s showing up every week when if this policy were to pass, because every organization would simply start asking for them, whether or not they have any use for them. And in fact, there's no controls in this policy that prevent them from selling them. Now, of course, obviously there's currently controls in 8.3, but I see little reason to funnel 24s randomly because somebody thinks it's convenient. I also question, again, as with the previous policy, this one holds out the bogeyman of filing requests with ARIN as being somehow overly onerous or impossible to manage, and I just have never seen evidence that that's the case. I'm not saying that all my transactions with ARIN go smoothly. Certainly, there are challenges from time to time, but for any business that has to operate, dealing with ARIN is likely to be the least of their administrative hassles. So I oppose this policy, and I'm heartened to hear that it sounds like our colleagues at RIPE has solved this problem for us.
Thank you.
Leif Sawyer, GCI Alaska. I think this could be rewritten as
So you're volunteering then?
as ARIN will automatically hand every member a free /X at Christmas time, and it would be equivalent. Hanukkah, sure. No, I move to abandon.
Not quite to that point yet, but thank you. Owen?
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications, ARIN AC. I support abandonment of this proposal. I take issue with the problem statement, the claim that ARIN's process is so onerous that getting a 24 is more difficult than what the 24 is worth is patently absurd, in my opinion. I have done many applications for many very small businesses over the years and gotten many /24s and 22s and whatnot from ARIN on their behalf without any tremendous difficulty in the process. And even under the current framework, which is more difficult than it's ever been in the past as a result of paranoia over exhausting the free pool, which I think will be more of a relief at this point than anything else. It's still not that hard. It's just not that hard, especially if you're just trying to get a /24. In answer to your question about what is the minimum size, yes, that was ambiguous until about the middle of September, but with the publication of the latest NRPM, it is in fact a /24 throughout all of Section 4.
And one hopes that it would not change out from under us as we were to be implementing it.
We have a remote, Jason.
Thank you. Remote user?
Yes. Marla Azinger from Frontier Communications says she disagrees. Both small and large companies need to be pushed onto IPv6 equally and given IPv4 on an equal basis. It's just as hard for a large entity to go IPv6 as it is a small company due to money and complexity. Also, it doesn't help a large entity convert to IPv6 if all the smaller companies they provide service to are only using IPv4. She's not in support of this policy.
Thank you.
Jason Schiller, Google, oppose. I just wanted to follow up on Owen's point about how onerous it is to get a /24. And I just wanted to point out that this policy was originated prior to what happened in September, making the minimum of 24. And I think part of the originator's concerns in this case was this dance that they had to do to get 2 upstream providers and get an ASN and show that they're multi-home in order to qualify to ask for a 24 and then get their 24 and then cancel their other upstream and stop using their ASN. And I think a lot of this changed in September when the minimum became a 24. And my read of PPML is that most of the people that were really pushing for this policy backed away after the events in September. So I think that there's probably very little need for it at this point because of the minimum being lowered to a 24. At least that's my read on PPML, and I'd like to hear from anyone who believes that to be different.
Any other comments, specifically dissenting comments, maybe in favor?
I'm going to be closing the microphone soon. If you want to speak on this or respond to Jason's question, please approach the mics. Okay, microphones are closed. Thank you. RS. Okay, Andrew, come on up. We have our last policy, and it is draft policy 2014-19, new MDN allocation based on past utilization. And
Just to note, we are into the lunch hour now.
right, this is now officially lunch. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. Ah, power of lunch. Okay, so we recently updated the MDN policy to clarify some questions that staff had. And based upon the new policy, we have a requested change to the recent change. The idea here is the previous policy proposed 2 methods for determining site sizes for MDNs, and we're adding a new method to determine the site size. Currently, the only way you can get an allocation for a site is via immediate need, but it's not always possible for organizations to complete that within the 30-day time frame for what they need. So this policy is proposing a different method. And the method is at the bottom of the slide in bold, a 3-month supply if there is an applicable 1-year utilization rate specific to the use to be covered by the new MDN on which to base a 3-month supply. So that is the change. All the rest of the text is basically the same. There's a little formatting difference, but basically the same. And so the questions we have for you today is, do you support this new change to add a 3rd option for justifying a new MDN site? And if you have any comments on this new text.
Microphones are open.
Martin Hannigan, Akamai Technologies. Thank you, Andrew, but I'm curious, where did you get the terminology regions in the examples?
Regions in the examples.
So in the text it says in your problem statement, you use terms. You say stuff like it is also anticipated that half of Region 4 will be shifted to Region 5.
So I believe that's an example that the author proposed for a reason to justify why this is necessary.
Okay, who's the author, if you don't mind me asking?
Jason is the
Okay.
author.
And the second question that I have is, again, and we've had this argument multiple times, but do you care to elaborate on what evidence of deployment is? And are you really saying that companies or networks should go deploy equipment without any belief that they'll get addresses, and potentially they won't get the addresses, and they just wasted their capital deploying significant amount of equipment to provide evidence that may not even result in the issuance of addresses?
So I believe, well, the intent of this is to make it easier for organizations to work with ARIN so that they get the space that they need when they need it. And evidence of deployment was the language that was agreed upon in the last policy change.
Well, it was agreed upon by some folks, and I was at the PPC where we discussed this, and
Sure.
there was quite a bit of disagreement on the term and the definitions.
I would agree there was a discussion about that, but the AC believed that we had come to consensus on the term and moved that policy into the text
So
now.
I'm opposed.
This doesn't change
I'm opposed
that.
to the, I'm done talking. I'm opposed to the proposal. And, you know, I'm extremely concerned. The theme recently from the RNAC seems to be about limiting our growth and our ability to grow our networks, and it's very concerning. Thank you.
Martin, this is John. Got a question. Would there be a change to this policy? Is there a change to this policy that would make it acceptable? No. Okay, thank you.
Jason?
Jason Schiller, Google, and the originator. I'm going to try and answer your question, Marty. The question was with respect to region. Region was a construct that was part of the original MDN policy. There was an issue where an ISP had fragmented their network topologically into different regions that were growing at different rates. So they wanted each region to be looked at independently. But there was also a concern from the community that there might be a number of regions that are underutilized, and it would be hard to top up a growing region when there's a bunch that's underutilized, because really you just screwed up your IP allocation plan and you need to renumber some stuff. So the original MDN policy was sort of a compromise to recognize that there could be topologically significant regions within a network, that they might have different growth criteria, and that if you've done your work well enough, you should be at least 50% utilized on average before you need to top up any one region. So that's the pre-existing MDN policy. That's the pre-existing use of the word region. The way it was intended here is in that same use. The point I was trying to make was there might be cases where you have an existing MDN regionalized network with years of growth behind it, and you might be creating a new MDN, a new region, and you might actually have data to back up how much address space you're going to need over the next quarter. And that might be more than what you can get under the other two choices, which is the minimum allocation size under 4215 or the immediate need under 4216. So did I answer your question, Marty? Okay.
Owen?
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications. I support the policy as written. I am confused by Mr. Hannigan's comments in that I think that this is seeking to make it easier for people to get addresses for a new discrete network rather than harder. I think it's seeking to lower some of the thresholds and some of the challenges, and so I don't see this as being trying to restrict growth or restrict people's utilization. I think that the lack of IPv4 addresses is going to do a good enough job of that on its own as we move forward, and you know, that's why people need to get to V6. But in terms of this policy, I think the proposal is helpful. I think it solves a real problem, as Jason has described, and I think that it supports further growth rather than inhibiting it.
Remote participant? Okay.
Thanks. So Owen, I don't disagree with you at all. My concern, though, and in my experience with ARIN, is that when there are vague terms in policy, that there are creative applications and implementations of the policy. So I would urge you, if anything, first, abandon this and forget it. But second, if you won't, which I don't expect that you will, that you should be extremely careful with the vague term evidence and what that means and what that means to operating a network. Thank you.
Marty, question for you. Yeah. As the current phrase evidence of deployment is already in the policy now, in the policy manual now, what would you suggest in terms of changing that language?
So to be clear, I opposed the language in the first place before that was inserted, so
Yep.
I want to reiterate that. Secondly, if you operate a network, you understand that it costs money to deploy routers and machines and sign contracts for data centers and enter into agreements for capacity. And without some expectation that if you follow the process, you will get the addresses, it's a hard task to deploy. You know, for example, in my case, millions of dollars of capital, and only to find at the end of that endeavor that There's no light at the end of the rainbow, or no pot at the end of the rainbow, so to
So
speak.
Marty?
Just to respond, I just want to be clear. The policy that we're talking about actually took effect September, is Leslie here?
That's right, and that doesn't mean that I can't continue to oppose that
September
language since it's
15th,
come up
right.
again here.
No, no, I understand. What I'm
Right.
saying, though, is that, to my knowledge, I don't think anyone's been processed under the language evidence of deployment. It actually is more precise than what we were prior being required to do, which is we were in the situation of not being able to say what we were looking for. Now, rather than actually asking for whatever arbitrarily might come to mind, we're asking for evidence of deployment, which in almost every case, we've already been provided by people under MDN policy. It's just we didn't have a phrase that incorporates it. People who have bought equipment or done POP contracts or have done upstream contracts or have done co-location contracts have evidence of deployment. So
Evidence of
I would
past
be all
deployment.
in favor of tighter definition of what that term means. But I guess I don't know of any, we haven't had anyone actually complain about the use of the term yet.
Second time around, thanks.
Okay, so can you suggest a policy to improve that language? Because it's only been in effect a month. That's what I'm trying to get at. Well, if you can provide language of what you want us to look like, look at during an application, that would help.
Mike Joseph, Google. Marty's concern about the existing language notwithstanding, I support this policy and would highlight to the community that this policy is simply about splitting an MDN. You have some number of MDNs, you want to split one. This policy quite simply describes how you would do so and determine the size of the prefix to which that new MDN is entitled. It doesn't change anything about evidence, doesn't add restrictions. In fact, as Owen points out, it makes it easier. And there are networks out there with MDNs who already have run rates, and there's no question about deploying new equipment without knowing the users are there. This is, you have equipment, you have users, you want to split it. And this policy makes that easy to do, and I support it.
Jason?
Jason Schiller, Google. I just also want to point out that this is not a recommended draft, so it's not moving forward in this cycle.
That's correct.
So the text will unfreeze shortly, and there is a chance to revisit
Evidence
this
of
vague
deployment if we
term.
want to.
And if we think that there's a better term to put in there instead of evidence of deployment, I mean, there's certainly going to be a window that opens up for that. So if we think there's a better phrase or better terminology or a better definition, I would not be opposed to tackling that alongside this policy.
Nope, yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Marty?
So just to be clear, I'm not objecting to policies or cycles ago. You're moving language from A to B, including that text, and I think that regardless of the problem statement, that any of the text is open for objection or modification.
Absolutely.
So I want to be clear that it is a legitimate objection. Second, what would you replace it with?
I have not spent time worrying about this yet because I believed that we had found a good place. We'd found a good set of text, and that I had not heard of any issues with the current phrasing. So if there are issues with the current phrasing, then I'm happy to actually hear them and listen to alternative text phrases to replace that. So if we don't like evidence of deployment, and we think that is too strict based upon how ARIN is applying, doing allocations or assignments, then let's come up with a new text that works for us. So
I will go a different direction. Same thing I said when the original phrase came up. I would be a huge supporter of an adding of an element of definitions that says evidence of deployment. This is documentation or something to the effect that shows that some equipment or services or contracts have been entered into, such as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, et cetera. Right now, we're, as ARIN staff, as we said in the staff comment when this first came around, we're going to do our best to try to take the essence of that and apply it. But it's always better if what we are applying is actually specific and is what you want. I don't know what you think would be good evidence of deployment that we wouldn't consider, but I'd prefer to know it now and have it in a definition so we can just say yes.
Well, sure. And I think you have my feedback, and I think that there are at least one or two network operators on the AC that could probably come up with some reasonable terminology that would be a little bit less offensive, or not offensive, but onerous than this. And again, this is based on my experience and with multiple applications for addresses with ARIN. I can send contracts all day long. I don't believe they understand a word of what I'm sending. And I don't believe I should be required to have contracts in place for locations that, I don't have some reasonable assurance that if I follow the policy, then I'm not going to have a surprise at the end and not get the addresses. Thank you.
Fair enough.
I'm going to close the microphones, approach the queue. Last call, I'm closing the queue in 10, 5, 3, 2, 1. Queue is closed. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Just a reminder about the room.
Room. Okay, so a couple of things. We're now closing. Thank you, everyone, for coming. There is a room available if you wish to get together with some of the AC members or of the various shepherds and work on any of these. There's a room available to do private meetings. For those of you who are going to be here Thursday, we're going to be talking about these policies again. Hopefully, we'll see some improvements, and we'll get closer to where we're going. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in the PPC. Hopefully, this will help everyone in the evolution of policies. Thank you very much.